So I want you to imagine something for a second. You are sitting on your couch, right?
Okay, I'm there.
And you're watching a high-octane zombie blockbuster on Netflix. Like, specifically, let's talk about the show Kingdom.
Oh, man. Such a good show. The sheer chaos of it.
Right. It is terrifying. You've got these flesh-eating monsters with pale, glowing eyes, and they're just sprinting around, completely tearing people apart.
Yeah, and bringing an entire civilization, the Joseon Dynasty, just completely to its knees.
Exactly. And obviously, when you're watching that, you think, okay, this is grade A zombie fiction. It's totally made up.
Right, because monsters aren't real.
Well, that's the thing. How much of that do you think is actually real history?
I mean, the literal resurrected corpses,
Yeah.
0%. But the rest of it.
Yeah, that is the crazy part. Because the engine actually driving that on-screen horror, the absolute panic, the mass starvation, the terrifying disease outbreaks, that was 100% real history.
It is wild when you actually dig into it.
It really is. So for today's deep dive, we are looking at this incredible source material, Kim Yoon-hee's actual work.
Yeah, and the mission here is just fascinating. We're exploring that boundary between fiction and reality.
Because she took meticulously documented historical traumas and just spun them into this legendary, modern, global pop culture phenomenon.
She really did.
Yay.
And we are going to look for the real monsters in the historical record today.
So let's set the baseline here. Before we get into the real horrors, we have to draw a clear line between the Hollywood treatment and the actual verified history.
Yeah, because it's a fascinating boundary to walk. When you watch ancient Seoul being overrun by, literal sprinting zombies, your brain naturally wants to compartmentalize.
Right, you have to separate it out.
Exactly. You tell yourself, okay, the costumes are historical, they look amazing, but the threat is purely imagined. People in the Joseon-era did not magically rise from the dead to bite their neighbors.
Just because the local magistrate was corrupt or whatever.
Right. But the underlying desperation, that feeling of a society being hunted by something it just couldn't understand, that is meticulously chronicled.
And that's what blew my mind when I was reading through the source text about the veritable records of the Joseon dynasty.
Oh, veritable records are amazing.
They really are. I mean, think of those records as like a modern, highly sanitized, rigorously verified daily news feed of the state.
Yeah, it was incredibly bureaucratic. Very dry stuff, usually.
Right. So you are never, ever going to find an official entry saying, like, update for today, the dead woke up and ate the royal guard.
No. The supernatural resurrection, the superhuman agility that is purely the lore. It's the fictional wrapper.
But when you strip away that supernatural wrapper, what you actually find in those daily logs is, well, it's deeply unsettling.
It is. Because the expert analysis of those records shows something happening with terrifying frequency. Massive outbreaks of contagious diseases.
Right, and the sources use specific historical terms for these, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They use terms like yoriyok or on-yoke.
Yoriyok and on-yoke, okay.
Exactly. And when you see those words inscribed in the veritable records, you are looking at descriptions of severe epidemic fevers. And these were just sweeping rapidly through towns and villages.
But wait, let's unpack that a bit, because when I hear fever today, I think of, taking a sick day.
Right, you take some Tylenol and watch TV.
Exactly. It implies a few days in bed, maybe a trip to the pharmacy for some over-the-counter medicine, and you catch up on some reading.
But we have to totally recalibrate our understanding of what a fever meant in that era.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about the 17th century here.
Right. No germ theory, no antibiotics.
None of that. Before modern epidemiology, an outbreak of yoriyok wasn't a mild flu. It was a completely community-destroying event.
But how does that actually work mechanically? I mean, I have a hard time believing a fever, even a severe one, could collapse an entire functional society.
You'd think humans are more resilient than that, right?
Yeah. I mean, viruses don't usually destroy societies on their own. Was the disease really that apocalyptic, or is there a missing piece to this puzzle?
Well, the disease itself was highly lethal, but you are totally right to question the mechanics of the collapse. Because a virus rarely destroys a healthy, stable society overnight. It needs a vulnerable host population.
Right, so it's like the societal immune system was completely shot before the virus even arrived.
Exactly. What the yoriyok did was paralyze the foundational functions of daily life. So imagine a village where this mysterious fever begins transferring from house to house within a matter of days.
Okay, so the immediate physical symptoms hit. High temperatures, delirium.
Incapacitation. Which means that suddenly, A massive percentage of your workforce literally cannot move.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about the labor aspect.
Right. The local economy just freezes. Nobody is well enough to harvest the fields. Nobody is trading goods at the market.
So the physical reality of the fever creates this immediate logistical nightmare.
Exactly. And the elders, the people who hold the community's institutional knowledge, they're dying off first.
So the disease triggers a complete supply chain breakdown. The farmers can't farm, so the healthy people start running out of food.
And being hungry makes them even more vulnerable to the disease.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle.
It is. And that brings us to that crucial missing piece you mentioned earlier. 17th century Joseon was not a healthy, stable society when these fevers hit.
It was a perfect storm, basically.
Literally a perfect storm of vulnerability. The societal immune system was virtually non-existent, and that was due to a cascading series of compounding disasters.
Okay, walk me through those disasters. Where does it start?
Well, it begins with the immediate aftermath of the Imjin War. That was the brutal series of Japanese invasions of Korea.
Right, and the sources are very explicit about the sheer kinetic destruction of that conflict. They mention shattered infrastructure and burned fields.
But you have to take that down to the ground level to really get it.
Yeah, paint a picture for me. What does a shattered infrastructure actually look like to a peasant just living out in the provinces?
Well, basically, it looks like total displacement. I mean, the Imjin War wasn't just some minor border skirmish.
No, it was massive.
Right. It was a multi-year, devastating conflict that reached incredibly deep into the peninsula.
And invading armies back then, they didn't just march through quietly?
Not at all. When armies moved through pre-industrial agricultural zones, they used scorched earth tactics. They burned the grain storages.
Just to deny the enemy food, right?
Exactly. And they destroyed the irrigation systems that literally took generations to build. They slaughter the draft animals required to plow the fields.
Oh, man. So for a peasant, your primary source of wealth, sustenance, and stability isn't just disrupted. It is completely erased.
Erased. You have massive numbers of people who are forced to flee their ancestral homes. They're living as refugees in their own land.
Just wandering mountain passes. Highly stressed, traumatized.
Lacking basic shelter or sanitation.
It's just horrific. You have an entire population already traumatized by extreme human violence, wandering a landscape of ruined fields.
It's incredibly bleak.
That sounds like a recipe for a dark age all on its own. I mean, it's hard to imagine how it gets any worse than a scorched earth war.
It gets worse because the global climate decides to turn against them right on the heels of the war.
Of course it does.
Yeah, we see the arrival of this massive global climate anomaly known historically as the Little Ice Age.
See, Little Ice Age sounds almost charming. Like, I don't know, a quaint winter festival or something.
Right, like maybe it just snowed a little extra one year.
Exactly. Until you look at the actual mechanics of what a drop in global temperatures does to a pre-industrial agricultural society.
The mechanics are absolutely devastating because the Little Ice Age caused consecutive years of extreme crop failure.
Wow, consecutive years.
Yeah, we aren't talking about one bad harvest where people had to just tighten their belts. We are talking about year after year of the earth just refusing to yield food.
Because the average temperatures dropped, right?
Just enough to drastically shorten the growing seasons. Frosts arrived early, so the seeds that peasants planted to try and rebuild after the war,
They just died in the fields.
they simply died. And the result was massive, catastrophic starvation.
Let's just dwell on the sheer misery of this for a second. Think about what it actually means to be living through this specific window of time.
It's almost unimaginable.
It is. You survive a horrific, bloody war. Your village is burned down. You finally think, okay, the violence is over.
You return to whatever's left of your land.
Right. You try to rebuild, and then the sky turns cold. The climate literally changes on you.
You are simultaneously displaced by human violence and starved by a global climate anomaly.
Society isn't just fraying at the edges at this point. The very fabric of survival is unraveling.
And that physical starvation, it fundamentally alters human biology, but also psychology.
How so?
Well, biologically, when the human body is starved over a period of months, the immune system collapses.
Which goes back to the fevers.
Exactly. This is why the Uri-Yoke fevers were so utterly devastating. The virus entered a population that was biologically incapable of fighting it off.
Wow. But you mentioned the psychology, too.
Yeah, the psychological toll is where the real horror emerges, because the historical records are brutally clear about the behavior of communities under this level of duress.
What were they doing?
People were driven to unthinkable desperation just to secure like a handful of grain, basic societal order just completely disintegrated.
Even with all the strong cultural norms, like the deeply ingrained Confucian respect for elders.
And gone. The neighborly bonds, the authority of local magistrates, it all just completely collapsed. Panic set in.
It's the ultimate powder keg. You take a population that is starving, traumatized, and biologically depleted.
And then you drop an invisible, highly contagious killer right into the middle of them.
The panic that sets in must be so visceral.
Oh, it was. Records show people abandoning their sick family members, fleeing blindly into the countryside to try and escape a killer they couldn't even see.
It's a complete reversion to primal survival instincts. Institutional trust is entirely gone. You know, I was looking at Kim Yoon-hee's creative process in the translation notes, and this is where her genius really crystallized for me.
It really is brilliant how she adapted it.
Right. She didn't just invent a scary monster out of thin air because she wanted to make a fun action show. She looked at this very real, highly documented historical despair.
The starvation, the fleeing refugees, the collapse of order.
The sheer psychological terror of the Yuriok fevers. And she asked this profound narrative question.
What if all of that literal physical suffering looked like a physical monster?
Exactly. What if this invisible disease, this gnawing starvation, was actually a physical thing hunting you?
Giving that invisible horror a physical form completely changes how we process the historical trauma.
It totally does, because put yourself in the shoes of a 17th century peasant for a minute. The fear of an invisible killer, a fever that just takes your child in the middle of the night.
While you're already starving to death.
Right. It's an unimaginably helpless feeling.
Yeah.
You cannot fight a fever with a sword. You can't outrun a climate anomaly.
It is pure, crushing, existential dread.
But if you personify that invisible fear as a sprinting, flesh-eating zombie, suddenly it becomes tangible.
It becomes a monster you can actually see with your own eyes.
Yes, it becomes something you can physically barricade a door against. It becomes something you can fight.
And that allows the audience to actually confront the trauma. The zombie kingdom is the embodiment of the plague, the starvation, and the collapse of society, all wrapped into one terrifying package.
It translates a depressing documentary about famine into a high-octane action thriller.
Exactly. You are fighting the famine. You are outrunning the plague.
I wonder, though, how much of this breakdown in societal order is unique to the cultural framework of the Joseon dynasty?
That's a great question. Because it feels very specific to that place and time.
Right, but when I read about neighbors turning on neighbors and the complete evaporation of public trust, it feels like a profoundly universal human reaction to extreme disaster.
And the historical parallels strongly suggest it is a universal human constant.
Like, where else do we see this?
Well, if you look at 14th century Europe during the outbreak of the Black Death, the human psychology mirrors the events in Joseon almost perfectly.
Oh, wow. Really, the exact same reactions.
Yeah. In Europe, you had this mysterious, unstoppable disease decimating the population. And the reaction was mass hysteria, the complete breakdown of public order, and intense scapegoating.
Because people desperately need someone to blame when they can't see the thing that's actually killing them.
They do. In Europe, it led to horrific persecution of marginalized groups.
Right.
And in Joseon, the panic led to a breakdown of the rigid class systems and family structures. So the specific cultural manifestations differ, but the core human reaction is identical.
So the parallel here isn't about, like, magical zombies happening everywhere. It's that when society faces an invisible killer it cannot understand, we look for a scapegoat.
Panic takes the wheel, and public trust entirely disintegrates.
That brings it so close to home, doesn't it? Especially when you think about our own modern experiences with global pandemics or even just severe supply chain breakdown.
Oh, absolutely. You see people hoarding supplies instantly.
You see a sudden, sharp rise in paranoia. You see how quickly people lose faith in the institutions that are supposed to protect them.
The mask of civilization slips away very, very quickly.
Yeah. Whether you are in a 14th century European village, a 17th century Korean province, or a 21st century grocery store.
Our psychological wiring reacts to unstoppable disease and systemic collapse in a remarkably predictable way across centuries and continents.
It's actually kind of terrifying how predictable we are.
It really is. But we also have to look at how the institutions respond.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about the ruling class.
Because in Joseon, when society started unraveling and people started fleeing their homes, how did the government actually manage this disintegration of public order?
Well, you would hope, given the Confucian ideals of the ruler acting as a benevolent parent to the people, that they mobilized grain reserves and sent healers,
They
right?
would hope that, yeah.
But the show portrays the government response as incredibly cynical and self-serving.
And the historical reality was terrifying in its own right, though perhaps it was driven more by draconian pragmatism than pure malice.
What do you mean by draconian pragmatism? What did they actually do?
Well, when epidemics like the Yuriok fevers threatened the capital, or even just the surrounding local districts, the Joseon government implemented strict quarantine and isolation measures.
And these historical protocols were meticulously recorded.
Very meticulously.
But wait, what are the actual mechanics of a 17th century quarantine? I mean, without digital tracking or modern hazmat gear, how do you enforce a lockdown on a starving populace?
You do with raw physical force.
Just brute force.
Exactly. Entire villages where an outbreak was suspected were heavily restricted. Travel between regions was strictly monitored and often completely halted.
By who? The local police.
By armed guards. They were stationed at mountain passes and river crossings.
Wow.
Yeah, the government essentially created physical barricades to halt the spread of the disease.
Wow.
And that meant trapping people within the infected zones.
So if you were in a village where the fever broke out, you were not allowed to leave.
Even if you were completely healthy, you're just left there to wait it out.
This is where the modern adaptation elevates the history so brilliantly for me.
How so?
Because if you watch the show, those exact documented historical quarantine protocols are turned into major narrative plot points.
Oh yeah, the physical barricades, the travel bans.
The sealing off of infected provinces by heavily armed royal guards, it is all right there on the screen.
It's incredibly accurate to the historical vibe.
But looking at it through the historical lens, it totally recontextualizes the whole story.
Yeah.
Because you realize the true villain isn't the resurrected corpse.
No, the real horror wasn't a corpse biting your arm. The true horror is the chilling reality of systemic indifference.
Exactly. A corrupt government failing its starving people. You have peasants who are sick, hungry, and terrified, and the very ruling class that is supposed to protect them instead locks them in a quarantine zone.
And abandons them to die alone in isolation.
Just so the capital can stay pristine and safe, the state's attempt to contain the outbreak makes things infinitely worse for the people on the ground due to political corruption.
The tragedy of that systemic failure is profound. I mean, imagine the psychological betrayal.
You are trapped by the very people meant to ensure your survival.
Right, and the sources highlight that political corruption exacerbated this immensely. Local officials would hoard grain meant for relief efforts.
Or they just flee the infected zones themselves, right?
Exactly, they would run away while ordering the guards to lock the peasants inside.
So the quarantine was not a medical haven designed to treat the sick.
No, it was a death sentence enforced by the state to protect the elite.
It is the ultimate betrayal of the social contract. And this actually leads us to the most fascinating artistic choice in the entire narrative, I think.
The K-zombie metaphor.
Yes, because you have all these incredibly deep, painful historical scars, right? The vast class divides, the starvation, the political corruption, the brutal quarantine measures.
There's a lot of heavy historical trauma.
So how do you translate that specific, heavy reality into global pop culture, into a creature feature?
You do it through the defining physical characteristic of the K-zombie.
Which is the fact that they sprint.
Exactly. The sprinting is everything.
Because traditional Western zombie lore usually features monsters that are slow. They shamble, they drag their feet.
Very Romero-esque.
Right. And I've always read that as a metaphor for, like, mindless consumerism, or just the slow, creeping inevitability of death.
Yeah, you can outwalk a traditional zombie, but eventually you get tired and it catches you.
But the K-zombie, as conceptualized in these source notes, is fundamentally different. They move at terrifying breakneck speeds.
They hurl their bodies through the air. They are totally relentless.
So why sprint?
Well, the expert analysis in the sources points out that the sprinting is a deeply intentional, artistic metaphor.
A metaphor for what?
These fast, vicious creatures represent the unchecked, explosive rage of a populace driven to the absolute brink by systemic oppression.
Wow.
Yeah, it is the physical manifestation of class exhaustion.
Okay, you have to unpack class exhaustion for me in this context. What does that actually look like?
Well, think about the compounding disasters we just discussed. The peasant class has endured the kinetic violence of the Imjin War.
Right, the burned fields and displacement.
Then they have endured the slow, agonizing starvation of the Little Ice Age.
The consecutive years of crop failure.
And then they endured the terror of the Yuriok fevers. And finally, on top of all of that, they endured the betrayal of being locked in quarantine zones by corrupt officials who were hoarding all the food.
So they are physically and psychologically exhausted by systemic oppression.
Exactly. And the sprinting zombie is what happens when that exhaustion finally reaches a breaking point and converts into pure kinetic fury.
It's like all that pent-up historical frustration finally just snaps.
Yes, and when it snaps, it doesn't shamble slowly toward the palace.
It sprints.
It tears down the wooden gates of the corrupt officials' compounds. It doesn't care about your titles or your hoarded silver.
It is literally a rebellion narrative wearing the mask of a horror story.
That is exactly what it is. The monsters aren't just there for cheap jump scares. They carry the weight of a tragic backstory rooted in actual history.
But that makes so much sense. The sheer speed and aggression of the K-zombie is the kinetic energy of class rage.
They are fast because the anger of the oppressed, once finally unleashed, is fast and unstoppable.
And this is why global audiences fell in love with it. It bridges the gap between deep historical tragedy and modern zombie lore so effectively.
It really does.
Because even if a viewer watching in another country doesn't know the specific dates of the Little Ice Age,
Or the details of Joseon political factions.
right, they still feel that underlying emotional truth. You aren't just scared of the monster's teeth. On a subconscious level, you understand why the monster is so angry.
You recognize the systemic failure that created it.
And it also highlights the incredible resilience of the people who actually lived through that era.
That is such an important point.
Because the show is ultimately a thriller about outrunning monsters, but the history it is based on is a testament to human endurance.
The people of 17th century Joseon faced a monstrous invisible disease. They faced devastating climate shifts and indifferent corrupt governance.
And yet they survived. Society endured against all of it.
The descendants of those survivors built the modern world.
It really puts things in perspective. We started this deep dive by looking at terrified people running from glowing-eyed monsters on a screen.
And we discovered that the environment that birthed those monsters was horrifyingly real.
The severe epidemic fevers sweeping through ancient Seoul, the shattered infrastructure from war, the catastrophic famine.
And the psychological breakdown of a society abandoned by its rulers.
These are the real horrors that inspired the global phenomenon. The hunger, the disease, and the resilience of the people in the Joseon-era were as real as history gets.
The historical reality is far more complex and scarier than the fiction. And honestly, it leaves us with a really provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, what's that?
Well, if the terrifying sprinting zombies of the Joseon era are the perfect artistic metaphor for the explosive rage of a starving, oppressed people in the 17th century,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder what kind of fictional monsters, our own modern-day anxieties, our own supply chain breakdowns, and our own systemic institutional failures will inspire creators to dream up centuries from now.
Oh, wow. What a haunting thought to end on. The monsters we are currently building in the cultural subconscious without even realizing it.
Gives you something to chew on, doesn't it?
It really does. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We absolutely love untangling these incredible historical narratives with you, searching for the real stories hidden behind the fiction.
It's always a wild ride.
Keep questioning the media you consume. Look for the history hiding in the shadows, and we warmly invite you to return for our next exploration of the sources.